Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio and welcome to Capricorn TV live stream today. And I am super excited about today's author. I've been waiting all month on this one. This is my subject matter. This is the stuff that really appeals to me, and it's great to do this on the show today. We are going to be talking to Crichton E.M. Miller. His website is Crichton Miller. That's Crichton Miller.com. And of course, great to follow on with his website today if you are listening on the live stream, because it will help with some visual aids. But a little bit about today's book that we're going to review. It's The Golden Thread of Time. This book by Crichton E.M. Miller reveals that the Celtic cross is a machine to measure the wheels and cycles of nature and the heavens, with which our ancestors once kept time and invented the zodiacs. Timekeeping and prediction resulted from its use and a deep understanding of spiritual values forgotten in our modern world. Misinterpretation and sometimes deliberate obscurity and ignorance by religious and scientific authorities has led to a distorted view and historical perspective of the ancient past. So I'm going to welcome my co-host on the show first. Hi Heather, welcome to the show.
Hi James, it's great to be here again.
Are you excited about today's show, Heather?
I'm very excited to talk to Crichton because I've known about his work for many years now. So it's good to finally get to talk to him.
Well, for sure. Well, let's bring on today's guest, Heather. Hi Crichton, you're very welcome to the show.
Hi James, hi Heather. Thank you very much for inviting me on.
It's great.
Go with the flow. What would you like to know?
Well, first of all, this is, I guess, is a very radical theory and very new, very interesting. I love it. I think it's incredibly important, incredibly significant body of work. I guess the biggest thing of all, before we go into the theory and the book, which is a fascinating read, you got to get yourselves a copy of this, audience. It's just beautiful. Tell me about you, Crichton. Who you are, what's your background, how you got into this research, first of all.
Okay. What I am now is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. And I've spent most of my working career either in road transport or air traffic control and navigation. So I've also navigated yachts single-handed in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. So I have a fair foundation in the idea of what this is about and probably why it's been hidden or lost. Very difficult to say whether it's hidden or lost. But basically, these are trade secrets. So people think about conspiracy theories and so forth. So they say, oh, why are these things hidden from us? Of course, things are hidden from us now. So if somebody invents something at a university or so forth, it's a trade secret. And in ancient times, they didn't have any protection until royal assent came along. And then after royal assent, the first patenting in the 14th century. So what happened was these systems, if you like, for measuring time, for earning a living, for navigating the oceans, for traveling and carrying goods about were secrets. So here be dragons would be the greatest example on charts. You really don't want other people to know how you make your living.
Sure. So
as things progress and certain inventions were no longer needed, then they become forgotten. I think a good example of that would be the calculator. So what's happened to mental arithmetic since the calculator disappeared? And if you go back to finding longitude with the discovery of the watch, the problem was solved. So how they did it before that is now academic. So we have to go back to understanding that temples come from the word tiempo, meaning timekeeping, and so does church, from kirk. Kirk means ruler, but it also means ruler or measurer of circles, from kirkos in Greek. So both church and temple mean places of keeping time. And before they invented the 24-hour clock in the 14th century, they kept time with the zodiac and the moon and the sun. And you can see that if you look at the first 24-hour clocks, you can see the zodiac all around them, and the sun's got a little face on it. Horloge, I think, is the first one in the 14th century. Prior to that, it was necessary to have instruments to measure. But because they were church instruments or temple instruments, they became sacred. And so what happened is mankind to do its work had to find ways around that. So if I show you very briefly, this is a Portuguese mariner's astrolabe. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Okay, so it's got 2 sighting points here. So what you do with that is you hold it up to your eye and you sight a star. And then whoever's watching reads off the scale or the angle.
Gotcha.
From the plumb bob. Remember, it's called a quadrant. So a quadrant means quarter of a circle. So it came from a circle.
Sure.
Okay, so that's one of the things. Now, the other thing that mariners used was an astrolabe. So here we have one here. Okay, and that's a mariner's astrolabe. You see it's cross-shaped. It's a wheel with 360 degrees. Now, if you actually turn it on its end that way and put a handle on it, you've got a Celtic cross. How old is the Celtic cross? Well, they found one is Odin's wheel. It's also called Odin's wheel or the wheel of Tyrannus. And they found the oldest one now is 4,600 years old. It's just been dug up at Stonehenge, and it's in the local museum, so you can see it. Tiny little Celtic cross.
Wow.
So, with people who went to Stonehenge, and it was found in a burial cairn near Stonehenge. So what it has is little dots around the outside representing the months, and it's got the cross in the center, and of course it's a solar symbol. So that's quite interesting. So what I did is I invented, if you like, or recovered the Celtic cross, and to prove that it worked, I got 2 British patents on it. Well, I'm quite pleased about that, because that's tougher to get than to write a thesis and have it published by a peer group.
Oh, I know.
Right.
I know.
It works.
Yeah.
In other words, it works. It works. And so an example would be this, okay, which has got all the symbols of time on it. Okay, and of course the wheel spins. And that's what they're designed to do. So if you simplified it, then again you can hold it up and you see the wheel spins and reads the angle off.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Beautiful.
A modern example would be like that. Okay?
Very, very simple.
Very simple, and you know about Occam's razor, of course. Simple, the simplest answer is generally the right one.
That's true.
So, and I don't mean to be arrogant with that. It's just that it does everything that we have problems with the mysteries of. Now, it finds longitude as well as latitude. And how it finds longitude is that, remember we looked at the quadrant and you could sight along it this way. But you also have to remember that it can sight, if you're looking at the cross, it can measure an angle from there to there. And that's what got the patent. Because no other instrument does that.
Incredible.
Okay? So what that means is you can measure the edge of the moon against Venus and work the angle out.
That gives you the triangle, that gives you triangulation.
Yeah. Gives you triangulation, but does more than that because it also acts like a polaris. This is a real polaris, which has got a compass on it. And that's for sighting on a yacht or a ship. Then you can sight the angle on pilotage from the shore to the direction that the boat's traveling in. Well, of course, the Celtic cross does exactly the same thing. It triangulates in all directions, 360 degrees. It's quite hard to get academia to understand this because, of course, what it does is it throws a little bit of question into the idea that we are more developed now than we were 4,000 years ago.
Yeah, it's a conceptual, thing too, Crichton, that they don't like textual arguments and they don't like conceptual arguments. Academia wants something they can dig up and go, that's from this era, and that's a very oversimplified perspective of the situation, but it serves the point. I mean, that's really what they want to do. And when it gets into astronomy being linked with ancient sites, I mean, 90% of the monuments before 1500 BC have astronomical alignments.
Absolutely. And that's true. You've got the Chinese, the Maya, the American Red Indian with the medicine wheels, and of course you've got our people, the Celtic people, if for the sake of a better word. But of course they were migratory. Before they settled down to agriculture, they were hunter-gatherers. And it's interesting that in Scotland we speak Gaelic, and in Ireland they speak Gaelic, and in Galicia they speak the same language. So what you have is a people that traveled by the sea from Galicia, northern Portugal, along the Spanish coast up through France and round the coasts of Ireland and Scotland and up to Norway. And what they were doing was harvesting. So, for instance, we know in Scotland and Ireland, right this month, we've got the herring running, and following that's the mackerel. So they were harvesting. They were there for the harvest. And a little bit further north in the west of Scotland, they find that they were harvesting hazelnuts, and they were taking them out into the outer islands by sea, and they had a huge industry of making hazelnut bread. But these people were navigators. And traveling in those days, there were no roads. And of course, people they think, well, there were roads, or you walked across the land. No, if you ever walked across a wild bit of Scotland, you would know you needed a road. It's really rough, but traveling by boat up rivers and round the coastline, that's easy. And of course, we know that the Roman emperor, his name escapes me. Anyway, Julius Caesar, 69 BC, said that he saw families of people in boats up to 60 feet long, made of skin over wood, sailing over the waves like seabirds. Of course, they were rowing the big old trimarines, or what they call them, triremes.
Triremes, yeah.
Yeah, and unless the wind dropped, they couldn't catch them because they were so fast. Well, of course they would be, wouldn't they? The average speed from a boat point of view, you work out the length of the hull against the sea, and you can figure out its average speed. Well, a 60-foot yacht or boat of that sort of lightness is capable of doing 9 knots, which is around 11 miles an hour. You do that for 24 hours. It's easy to go to Brazil. It's easy to cross. And of course, even nowadays, we have the Inuit, who the young men still get their canvas boats and travel 1,800 miles in the summer, pulling the boats up onto the ice floes, turning them upside and using them like tents.
Wow.
What's so special about that?
For sure.
You know, these are people who knew where they were by the stars, the sun, the moon, the wind directions, and they traveled with the seasons. And what told them the season was the star sign, the sign in the sky.
Sure.
Now, this is the controversial bit. Genesis 1, verse 14 says, God put the sun and the moon and the stars in the sky and said, for signs to tell the time. And now what happens is you realize that the Chinese, the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Gaelic people, the Maya, they all used astrology to keep time. It's about time.
Because you talk about in your book the fact that astrology and astronomy were once unified, and then that changed the course of history once they were divided. Was it a divide and conquer strategy to
yes,
create
very
this
much so.
unity?
It's about this protection of trade secrets.
Right.
Look, without being too controversial, the biggest franchise ever worked was between the Holy Roman Empire and Constantine, and the first popes and emperors and the kings and queens of Europe. So, you know, it was a thing whereby everybody earned money, and the working people, the agriculture, they were all kept in line, and they were told when they should have the ceremonies and when to plant and when to sow and so forth. And if any of them talked about what I'm talking now, they'd been burnt at the stake because it was a trade secret. Okay. So you can see it on the charts, on the old charts. You can see it in the constructions all around the world, but it was very simple. So astrology was the key. Where does the word come from? Well, astrology is quite a recent word. It actually means primitive astronomy. But when you work the word out, it means astrologic, which means mathematics of the stars, as opposed to astronomy, which means naming the stars. So again, it's mixed up. From James' point of view, I know you do some work on ancient charts, James. The two most important charts is one that you would like, I think, is the Diego Ribeiro chart, which is kept in the Apostolic Bibliothèque. I can never remember it. Anyway, it's kept at the Vatican. And it's 1529. It shows perfect longitude, 200 years before the discovery of longitude.
Let's mention the British longitude system. I think it was the 1820s that the British correct longitude. Let's just kind of put that focal point in. That was a massive undertaking, Crichton. I mean, they put down a massive, it was what, £20,000, massive sum of money to figure longitude, because there was literally, they were losing trade. There was boats getting crashed onto coastlines because they didn't know where they were on the globe. It was a bad situation, and they threw the money at it, and eventually they paid it out and they corrected it with the greatest minds of the time. Yeah,
but the whole thing about any clock or watch, and I have one on my wrist, so I'll take it off. This is a Copernicus idea, and the argument of the church that the sun, the Earth was the center of the solar system, and of course the argument that the scientists upset the church with was saying that the sun was at the center of the solar system. But if you actually look at this watch, and I'm going to get it close to you, just imagine you're looking down on the North Pole of the Earth. Okay? If you're looking down on the North Pole of the Earth, the big hand, the hour hand, points at the sun. Well, it doesn't now because that's a 12-hour watch, but a 12-hour clock, a 24-hour clock, the sun is always pointed at by the mechanical big hand.
Gotcha.
Yeah? So, yeah, and that's just from this knowledge, okay, from the movement of the Earth. And if you look at this, you've got 4 seasons, but you've also got the 4 parts of the day. So how did they achieve that then? Well, they achieved that by looking at a northern pole star. Around the northern pole star is Draconis, the dragon constellation.
Sure. And
what it does is it goes around in the opposite direction to that which the Earth spins. So you can tell the time by it, because all it is all this thing on my wrist is a copy of what actually happens in nature. Exactly the same.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, I was
it's a combination between spirituality and practicality here, isn't there?
There's a wonderful mix.
Right,
There's
exactly.
a wonderful mix. You know, Crichton, I was in the west of Ireland the weekend, and I was actually, where you find these ancient megalithic places, you usually find a church or some sort of a Christianizing complex, whether that's going to be some sort of a temple. Even they just put crosses on the mountains where the megalithic places are, especially in Ireland. I don't know what it's like, but there was a massive onslaught to Christianize the pagans. And I was looking at it, I knew the show was coming up, and I was looking at very old Celtic crosses. We got some of the oldest in Europe here.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and I was just looking at them, and now that I know your book and I know your theory, Crichton, I'm looking at this stuff and I say to myself, I don't look at it as an ornate cross anymore. I can't. When I know and I see the knowledge, it looks like somebody has put a artifact, a relic in stone, and yes. You just can't escape the fact it looks like a technical device. It really, really does.
Yeah, and it's engraved to show what the purpose of that technical device is. So we have an issue in modern times in that the concept of how we think now is in a linear format. So we tend to think of ourselves from birth to death, somewhere along that road.
Sure.
And if somebody dies, we tend to think of them back there somewhere when they died, and the loss that's involved with it. But our ancestors didn't think like that. They thought it was cyclical. So they thought that, like the cross, everything goes round, the seasons come back again, and everything is reborn. So they had this kind of what would you call, not resurrection, but the concept of reincarnation, and that was a worldwide concept, and that's why the symbol's put there, because it can be either seen as being a promise that you will be born again, or it could be seen as an instrument to navigate your way to heaven, which of course is what the Egyptians.
Sure. You want to jump in there, Heather, before I go again?
Yeah, one of the interesting spiritual versus practical building connections that you make is in terms of the Egyptian god Thoth, and that his symbol was actually the Celtic cross, and that this was instrumental in building the Great Pyramids. I just found that section really fascinating because I'm very interested in ancient Egyptian culture.
Okay, what's really important is the Dixon relics in this.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, so I've got a little, can you bear with me a second? There's one prop
Yeah,
I forgot.
definitely.
Okay.
Wow.
It's this one, okay, which is, did you see that's a symbol for Aries?
Gotcha.
Right.
Sure.
Okay?
Yep.
It's also the symbol on the charts. And when you put a point from it here, it's the fleur-de-lis. But what's really important about it is it was made of bronze, and it was found in the Great Pyramid in the Queen's chamber, in the north shaft of the Queen's chamber,
Wow.
along with a bob and a piece of wood, which was reckoned by Piazzi Smythe, who was the Astronomer Royal for Scotland, to be a measuring scale. So it makes sense. And the reason why it's in bronze is because they didn't have lights like we have now, or instruments that were easily seen. So if you held a stick up against the stars at night, you wouldn't see it. But if you had a fire behind you, or a candle or a light, then it would reflect from the bronze and make it easy to see. So the V in the middle would catch a star as you measured the angle, okay? But this shape round the outside would also capture the moon. So now you can measure between, say, Venus and the moon by capturing it, and measure the distance or angle between the two. So it's a more advanced instrument that's in the Great Pyramid of Khufu, or was. It's all over the place. Robert Laval hunted lots of parts for it down in Aberdeen and so forth. But it was mistaken, in my opinion, because I made one, and it's in the book, and I made it and it works, and it's far more accurate than the Celtic cross because it's mounted on the top of a stick. Okay, so I often call this stick stones in the zodiac, and another stick across this way, marked, okay, and a plumb line hung from the center, and that's extremely accurate. A piece of timber on the cross part, 90 centimeters long, will measure to within 3 arc minutes. And 3 arc minutes is 3 nautical miles on the Earth's surface at the equator. Well, that's within visibility, if you see. So you could measure very accurately, lay out grids and maps and build angles and so forth with this simple instrument. And I think because it does complete spherical geometry, it just about did everything for them.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Crichton. I have no doubt in my mind that these guys knew spherical geometry. These guys knew they were on a globe. They knew exactly what latitudes they were at and longitudes. And I just know from all the megalithic monuments, they were able to pinpoint that moon, especially when you go to look at Callanish and some of the recumbent stone circles in Aberdeen. They knew where that moon was going to be on the horizon and its lunar maximums and lunar minimums. They knew how many years. They knew it all.
The 18.6 year cycle of the moon, where it comes back to the same spot it was 18.6 years before. They knew all that. And Callanish is a fine example because it's laid out like a Celtic cross.
Yeah, it's the one that springs to mind the most. And I just, I look at what the achievements of what these guys did, and you just can't do that unless you have a technology. You just can't do it.
No, that's right. The very interesting thing that I discovered recently is the very first verse in the Bible, and this is not a religious statement. It's just that we tend to ignore a lot of the old books that our ancestors spoke to us through. And it's about the very first lines in it is that God made the earth in 6 days. And it was in the morning and the evening. Well, when you start to look at what we've just been talking about, you look a little bit deeper than what they said. So you go, okay, why say in the morning and in the evening? Okay, because that's only 2 parts of the day. It's also 6 hours for each. So here we've got the 3 sixes. We've got 6 mornings, 6 evenings in 6 days. That's the first thing that they try to scare you off, isn't it? You know, you don't want to know this. 3 sixes is evil. Yeah, but hang on, it's the first lines in the Bible. It tells you, and you think, well, that's what it is, because if you multiply 6 by 6 by 1, you get 12 hours. 6 by 6 by 2, 24 hours. Work it up to 6, and you get 2,160 years in an astrological age. First lines in the Bible. It tells you all the natural numbers about precession of the equinoxes. You could say, well, okay, that's just everything. If you were to multiply it by 6, would come out in a circular number. Yes, except that the Earth actually rotates through one precessional cycle in 25,920 years. And they divided that by 12, which is 2,160 years. And Christ was called the Great Shepherd, and Amun means Amen at the end of the Lord's Prayer. And, you know, it was the sheep. You know, it was the age of Aries. And now the Roman Catholic Church, their hats are fish's heads.
Wow.
That's what they...
I'm glad...
So and the sign for Christianity is the fish. So you've got the age of Aries going into the age of Pisces, which we're still in, by the way. We've not come out to be, despite the millennium idea. And yeah, I think it's another 72 years. But you do go back to that. You see, in precession of the equinoxes is 1 degree every 72 years. So you multiply the first lines in the Bible, you know, 6 by 6 by whatever day it is, you get 72. How does that work? That was an accident. I don't think so. These guys are really bright. And what happened, in my opinion, is it's a trade. It was a trade. It was protected and it was kept secret. But it wasn't kept completely secret, because if you know what I'm telling you and you go into a church, it's obvious. Because it's all astrology in the church, isn't it?
Sure. I believe we have a Celtic cross in County Louth with astrological symbols on it that I haven't heard anybody talk about before. I think you can definitely see Gemini the twins and the scales, Libra the scales. It's in a cross.
You were asking a question about whether or not they knew the world was round. And you know that the Egyptians did astrology. So you know that. And you know that the basic of astrology was your sun sign. So how would you know what your sun sign was 4,000 years ago? If you looked at the sun, you would only see the sun. You wouldn't see the sign behind the sun. The only way you can do that is to know that the world's round and look at the sign that it's the opposite of it at midnight. So what's at midnight, okay, which you can tell from the dragon, Draconis, you can tell where midnight is. Then what you do is you look at that sign and you go 6 points around, 180 degrees around, that's where the sun is. And that's how you know somebody's sun's at. But you can only do that if you know the world is round.
Sure. You know, Crichton, I'm glad you mentioned...
It's simple, isn't it? It's reason and common sense.
It is very simple. And I want to pick up on what you said about the sixes as well. That, I mean, sure. Numbers are just numbers. You can take a number and do something with that number, or make some sort of symbolism out of a number system and say 3 sixes is evil. I understand that. I understand people can get carried away with that. But numbers are just numbers. It is a point worth noting that the geometry of the megalithic hinges, and I don't know anybody talking about this, that a lot of them are either 216 feet, that's a sexadecimal number, 216 feet in diameter, or they're actual, or if they're not 216, they're 212, which is equal to 666 divided by pi. There's
yeah, that's it exactly.
And Belfast Henge, the Henge in Belfast is 666 feet in diameter exactly, and I think they incorporated these sexadecimal numbers, and there is no other number system suited to us to explain. I mean, like again, 6 cubed, 6 multiplied by 6 multiplied by 6 will give you 216. And there is no better number system better suited to explain geometries of the Earth and where we are in a precessional cycle. It just breaks down to it naturally to a sexadecimal system.
Yeah.
And what better system to use?
Was natural order. And the moon and the sun, they're exactly half a degree across, or 30 arc minutes. And there's 720 of them in a circle around the Earth. And of course, horizon means what it says. It means from Horus, from the Egyptian god of, and from which we derive the word hours, which means time, and zone, which means circle. So horizon, our horizon means the place of time. And
wow.
That's like so obvious, you know,
wow.
to me.
Because you have a whole theory on the network.
Sorry?
Sorry, you have a theory on the whole network of Horus, that this was within several cultures and it was a sophisticated system that took a great deal of time and expertise.
Well, we talked about the aggressive British Empire when it ran its ships up the rocks. But long before we started conquering the other countries, and I write about it in my book, you have places where there are stone circles on islands, and so forth. And I believe they were manned. And if they weren't manned, they could be used at certain times of the year where you would go and you would find out your longitude. And we talked about Greenwich as being the meridian line. The meridian line is wherever you wish it to be. It isn't fixed in Greenwich, it's wherever you are. So that's really important. So you have meridian lines all over the place. So these guys, you know, maybe they earned money by saying, okay, here's how far you can go to the next one, okay, which is manned. So this will give you what you need to do to find your longitude to get to the next clock station. And why I think that is because every ancient civilization is built on astrology. Now, the Chinese have something very similar to the Celtic cross. They have a thing called the Luopan. And the Luopan is similar to the disc of the Celtic cross. If you hang a plumb line from the middle, it does exactly the same job.
Wow.
Okay, and they were great navigators, as you know, and so were the British, and so was everybody, because at the end of the day, how did you spread your civilizations around the world if you couldn't find out where you were going or what time it was? It's crucial, and that's why I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. I make sure that people's goods get to the right place at the right time by whatever transport means they can do. It's all about time and calculations. There's the practical side. Mm-hmm. The spiritual side is, what are we here for? How long have we been here? How can we know what we know? Why are the color of our eyes what they are? Those are all the questions that come out. And I think they answered that, and I think we've lost it.
Yeah. Another point worth noting is that most people don't realize how far up the northern hemisphere these guys were. They were up as far as somewhere up around 68 degrees of latitude in northern Norway. We have a massive lots of standing stones. I think they went personally up that far to get a grip on latitudes and longitudes, to know the extent of their globe and get a sense of distance. They're also down as far as, I'm talking about the European megalithic people.
Sure.
But
Beaker people, and they were spread throughout the Mediterranean. But when you go north, the Norwegian people and the Vikings, they of course knew the world was round because the sun never set, so it span right around in a circle. And it's very difficult when you talk to academics who have never been to Norway and have never experienced that, or you talk to somebody about Hatshepsut was a perfect example, trading with the Indian continent 3,000 years ago, and her fleets were traveling out of sight of land. How did they navigate? And how did the South Sea Islanders navigate? Exactly the same if you look at their work. But going back up to the north, this is about, which is quite interesting, is about how the Vikings came about. And if you go there, look at their churches, and they're covered in serpent scales, and you know, and dragons hanging from the round churches. So you know, that's how they navigated. They used the constellation Draconis, the dragon in the sky, and that's what it is. You know, astrology was a major science that developed all the ancient civilizations. And because, again, astrology is too close to the cross and too close to what religion is, then it would be distorted and turned into a pseudoscience. So an example would be modern Western astrology is 30 degrees out of date because it hasn't taken precession into account. So if you think you're a Virgo, you're not, you're a Leo. And, you know,
Wow.
feel sorry for the people that tattoo their star sign on themselves.
Another important correlation you make is the Orion correlation, because we don't just see this with the Great Pyramids in Egypt, but also in the Americas. And I found that really an interesting parallel that you talk about.
Well, I think Robert Bauval put that quite well in his Orion mystery, and, is that it was a reflection of the pyramids below. But what's so important about Orion is it's the beginning and the end of the 360-degree cycle. So it's the Omega and the Alpha and the Omega. And if you look at Christ and his 12 disciples, King Arthur and his 12 knights, Robin Hood and his 12 merry men, the story keeps going on. It's about the one man-shaped thing that controls 12 zodiac signs. And if you look at, people try nowadays talk about the 13th sign. Orion's the 13th sign. It starts in his right hand, and it's funnily enough, it was in 2000. It was the first time at the summer solstice. It was in the right hand. The sun was on the right hand of Orion for 25,920 years, and it won't be again until the next cycle. Yeah, but nobody knew. They all stood at Stonehenge and they looked at the sun in the sky. They didn't know it was in the hand of Orion because they couldn't see it because it was daylight. So Orion's really important. It's number one, and it's the end. It's the beginning and the end of each cycle. Every day and every year and every 25,920 years. So Orion is the most important marker, if you like. Number 12 on the clock, but it's actually 13.
You know, Crichton, I'm a bit of a dreamer, but I dream of a day when all the academics will work in unison. And I look at all the megalithic places in Europe, every megalithic country. You've got Norway, Sweden, Denmark, you know, all right around the Western European seaboard, Denmark, Holland, Brittany, Portugal, France, Ireland, Britain, England, Scotland, Wales. And all these megalithic territories, should we call them, it's clear there was a transfer of ideas and beliefs between all those different countries in ancient times, and they had to have crossed the bodies of water. If it was only on Western Europe, on the coastline, you could say they walked the coastline, but the fact that there are people there in Britain, especially Scotland, the stuff's the same as Newgrange, which the art is the same as Newgrange, which is the same as Malta, the same type of temples, the same type of alignments, all across the megalithic. There was clearly a cross-cultural set of beliefs and ideas, and I just think that this book that you have done and the painting of this device that you have done is the unifying thing to get these academics to talk. I really do believe that, Crichton.
I think it's difficult. It's very kind of you to say that, James, but I think that there's an issue here, and the issue is about commerce. So even an academic requires funding, and if it takes you 20 years to dig something up, then you know that's better funding than it's solved. We've solved that now. We don't need to look at that anymore.
Yeah.
So archaeoastronomy, for instance, very defensive on archaeoastronomy. They're looking at it, but it takes a long time. I don't disagree with them. They have to test everything. But, hey, I've got 2 patents on this. You can't get a better test.
Yeah.
So does it work or does it not? Yes, it does. and it's simple, you know.
And I come through the engineering pros. I've been a systems analyst in the engineering industry. I know what it's like to get a patent. We had to do patent in the engineering and go through and learn the processes of what's involved. That's a difficult thing to do. So I commend you on that, Crichton. I really do.
It's also expensive.
Very expensive.
But yeah, it's hanging on my wall. There you are. That's the patent on the Celtic cross. Hang on a minute. I'll go that way. Can you see it?
I can indeed. Wow.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. You see what it says it is?
You know, I can see it.
Yeah, it's a navigation.
Patents Act 1977.
Yeah.
And
astronomy. And
how long of a process was that to go through that? Did it take you a few years to go through that?
Yeah, 1997, and it was issued in 2002 on the 11th of December.
Oh my gosh!
I got two, and because I approached it from two different angles. But I state in the patent that it was probably used in ancient times. So it's kind of a nice little accolade because it's the British Patent Office is owned by the Queen. So that's nice.
So you have her stamp of approval.
Absolutely. Yeah. But the whole point about it is that's exactly what it was. The word ruler means a measurer. That's what it means. And I said to you earlier, the ancient word for church is kirk, which means ruler. And so your kings and queens were rulers. And, they don't rule now. And we've changed, and ordinary people now have power over their own lives. But you have to remember the trauma that went through. Most of the people that might have known this were probably killed in the trenches of the First World War and the Second World War. So the young men that went, it might have been a lord's son or a lady's son or a peer group or something like that. They were killed. And so the knowledge died with them. Because they would only pass this on to the children, wouldn't they? And it's the same with the secret societies, the guilds, the Freemasons. I'm sorry, the camera's wandering all over the place, folks. Can you see me?
It zooms in and out on its own.
With the secret societies, the Freemasons and so forth, they were Masons, and what they did was they built churches, and they had to know this to be able to build a church.
Sure.
Yeah. But
because you mentioned that the Templars probably dug up these secrets in the Temple of Solomon, that's one of the things they discovered.
Absolutely. And I write about that because they were the Knights Templar started navigating, and I also write about the pirate flag is a Templar flag, isn't it? You know that. The skull and crossbones, it's a Templar flag, so. Yeah, and I think they actually did it's very interesting. It's like Lanzarote, on the Canary Islands means Lancelot after the knight.
Yeah.
Is my camera driving you nuts?
Not really. It's trying to track you. Wow. Crichton, in a philosophical way, I mean, looking at your work, what would you? Do you see this as a sense of duty to understand the past? Do you see? Is this been a journey of discovery for you? Would you like to? Is there a reason you want to see the past understood? Tell me what your philosophy is on all of this.
Yeah.
What it means to you.
Okay. I spent quite a lot of time with the Maya, showing them how they built their own pyramids and stuff. And I went to several things, but I guess more than anything else, what started out as a curiosity when I was very young, developed into asking questions and trying to figure things out. But I guess what I also came to the conclusion after I'm 66 years old this year, there goes those sixes again, is that people seem confused. They're bewildered. They don't know the answers. Why on earth, if we all come from our ancestors, would we not know how our ancestors did what they did? And so I thought now, because it's no longer important, we're not disrupting society with this kind of knowledge, that perhaps it needed putting out there. that people might pick it up and run with it. When I wrote my first book back in 2001, and I thought, oh, people pick this up and run with it, and I'll have lots of heads helping me figure it out. Well, here we are, all these years later, still figuring it out for myself and trying to tell people about it.
Personally, I think, you know, and I always say this to people on a one-to-one basis, if you know who you are, I mean, I'm talking about our ancestors, our origins, or you have a better idea of it, well, then you know who you are going into the future. I do think the past is the future. I mean, if you think wrongly of yourself, who your country is or who you are, and, you know, you really, you know, where are you going with this? You know, I think it changes people. If you understand the past, it changes who you are, and that changes who you are in the future. Absolutely.
And I think that's right. You need to know where you come from to know where you're going. And I think that's it, really. It's disappointing in a way, I suppose, when you find out it was quite easy for them to do it. But then on the other hand, it's a matter of respect. I respect my father, he respected his. Why would I not respect my ancient ancestors? After all, we wouldn't be here without them, would we?
Sure. And in a way, I also, you know, I lament, I look at all these megalithic structures, and I look at them decaying in fields. Everybody knows the famous Newgrange and Stonehenge and Maze Howe, and they know the big famous sites, but there's other ones just decaying, and rock art. I mean, there's rock art just decaying in the fields in Ireland. And I feel sorry that such a massive undertaking, some 25,000 individual sites across Europe, I mean, it was a massive culture, and it was a very successful one. If you were to take a modern engineering company today and say, we have a presence in Norway, Denmark, England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, France, Portugal, that would be one of the most successful companies in Europe today. And that's the way I see it.
That's absolutely right. But so was Constantine when he created what he said was, if you remember, he had a vision of a cross. And he said, with this cross, this vision, I shall conquer the world. Well, he did. And exactly the same, but a new culture over the one that was before. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it doesn't matter, because it kept people together, it kept society stable. And in this world, and this is what they understood about the nature of time, time is a war between chaos and order. And what they tried to do was get stability, so that there was no chaos, so they could defend themselves from chaos. And we only have to look in the world now at places like Syria or Iraq and so forth to see what extreme chaos can happen when human beings start their conflicts. And they fought very hard to maintain that. Some people got hurt along the way.
Sure.
But it lasted for 1,500 years. And the Egyptian Empire did the same. It lasted for 5,000, I think, or 4,500, and so did the Chinese. They lasted in this, against this force of chaos that destroys everything. At the end of the day, the road of chaos is to entropy, isn't it?
Oh, for sure.
That steam engine. But the answer, in my opinion, to entropy is life. When you look around you, it's only life that makes things.
For sure. You want to jump in there, Heather, to wrap things up, I guess, in a minute?
So I found personally, by reading the book and, you know, kind of wrapping up where we're going with the conversation, is the symbolism of unity that you talk about, that the Celtic cross means. And for me, I come from a Celtic background, and from a spiritual or historical sense, it always meant that. But by reading your book, it's taken on a deeper level because of all the cover-ups that have happened. So I would say, asking the question to you, going into the future, do you think that the Celtic cross could become a new symbol of hope for the future and where we could go forward?
Well, people do awful things with symbols. And I think
True, very true.
Yeah. Especially what Hitler did with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that's the ancient symbol, isn't it? In India and China, and again, the Maya have it, and the Amerindians have it. I think the most important thing is understanding how our ancestors understood what time is. and we've got a lot of famous scientists at the moment trying to find out how time works and going off into various dimensions and so forth. Our ancestors didn't believe that. What they felt was that this is where we are and this is where we'll always be. And the most important lesson, I think, it was spare the rod and spoil the child doesn't mean beat a child. The rod means a measuring stick. It's a ruler. Comes from the word reed, from the Egyptians' reed, which was a segmented piece of grass. What it was trying to say, and Chaucer said it in his treatise to an astrolabe, if you don't teach a child cause and effect, to take responsibility for their actions by seeing what the outcome will be of what they do, then you'll spoil them. And I think that's missing in the world right now. Everybody needs to take responsibility for what they do and what they think and what they say. So there you are. Perhaps I ought to take responsibility.
I guess
yeah.
I just want to wrap things up, and I want to bring on another little device. You're probably aware of this, maybe not. I found it in an obscure reference one time, and I was searching for what answers you just provided me today. I was looking at ancient megaliths, knowing that these guys cracked longitude, looking for the device that did this, and of course we've just talked about your painted of the Celtic cross. It's the home run of all home runs. But there's another device called a Tanawa. Have you ever come across that?
The Tanawa?
Yeah, there's a cave painting of it somewhere. Basically, it's a similar thing. It measures the angle to the moon,
Okay.
and it comes at it that way. And I was like, aha! When I seen it, it also implies they needed accurate moon tables to calculate where they were with longitude. But it's a possible.
Very, very important you asked that, because this is what you calculate the tables with. It's called an ephemeris.
Gotcha.
Okay? Now, that gives the position of every star and moon and the positions of the planets at midnight, every night for years. If you look at the Antikythera mechanism, now, you guys know about the Antikythera mechanism?
From Greece. From Greece, the island.
Right, yeah.
Well, the thing about it is that you have to understand that does not measure the stars. What it does is predict the stars, and what it is a mechanical ephemeris. But it goes further than that. They developed this amazing piece of metallurgy and translated all the movements of the sun, the moon, the planets, and so forth, and created an almanac. So that it's more than an ephemeris. It isn't for one fixed time of the day. They created an almanac. But to be able to create that almanac in mechanical form, they had to be able to measure in advance to create the prophetic motion of it, 69 BC. Now, come on, you scientists, get real.
Get with the program.
For you guys.
For sure.
It's a lost wisdom, because if you understand and you can measure time efficiently, then you can make things happen. So, for instance, if you plant a seed in the ground, you know it's going to become a plant at some time. But that applies to business, it applies to your family, it applies to everything. If you know what cause and effect is, you now become in control of your destiny.
Sure.
And that's what they did.
For sure. Well, Crichton, we're at the top of the hour. Please give people your webpage and where they can get a copy of the book.
Okay, the easiest way to find me is to go onto Google and put in the Celtic cross, and I think it's about 5th down. Otherwise, it's crichtonmiller.com, CrichtonMiller.com, and the book's available on Amazon as a Kindle version or as a paperback.
Wonderful.
And Heather, if your website, you'll.
Sure. Heather, have you any final thoughts you want to say to Crichton before we go?
I just think it was wonderful to be able to get a chance to talk to you all.
I'm so delighted to be able to talk to you. Like I said, I've known your work, and we chatted by email several years ago, so it's been great to chat with you today. Really, really enjoyable.
Great. Keep in touch. And
yeah, definitely.
Well, it's been an honor speaking to you, Crichton. It really has. I really thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Heather. Good night.